You can kind of plan for these beautiful travelogue moments and these incredible locations, and actually sometimes the most powerful moments happen in a petrol station in Indonesia.
The finish line. The Indonesian island paradise of Lombok. 15,000 kilometres away.
Go on, overtake him, go on!
What the hell is going on?
To get there, the teams must pass through 7 checkpoints. Only when they reach one will they learn where the next will be. They'll need to navigate Eastern Asia through some of the world's most populous regions.
There's so many people there.
Oh my God. So this is herding ducks?
And some of its most unexplored.
Oh my God.
Oh gosh, it's just torrential rain.
Just suck it up and walk through it.
Awaiting the first team to cross the finish line,
We are so close. It's exciting.
a prize of £20,000.
Go, go, go!
We're going to start with how it all happened and the origins of the idea.
Studio Lambert development team had an idea for a show called Ticket to Ride, which was about exploring some of the world's most exciting public transport. And I think they were looking at routes from places like Beijing to Shanghai. And that idea got sort of parked for a little bit. And then Patrick Holland, who was at BBC Two at the time, put out a tender for a new travel adventure show that should be big, bold and exciting. And the development team at Studio Lambert took this idea called Ticket to Ride and thought, well, let's make it bigger, bolder, more exciting. So they took this idea of sort of Beijing to Shanghai and thought, why don't we do London to Sydney, is what it originally was. The idea for the show was called Flightless, and it was pairs of contestants race from London to Sydney without using a plane. We sort of started developing it. It became evident pretty quickly that it's actually not possible to get from London to Sydney without using a plane. So the idea became London to Singapore, and it was Tim Harcourt, who was the chief creative officer at Studio Lambert. He came up with the format point of doing it all for the cost of the airfare. And I think it was the kind of that moment where the idea began to feel really exciting. It just really fits the BBC mission statement, which is to inform, educate and entertain. And Race Across the World sort of found a perfect home at the BBC because it does all those 3 things.
And actually the celebrity version, unlike some other shows, really very, very much follows the same trajectory, doesn't it?
The basic idea was to not change it really at all, not to make accommodations for the fact they were celebrities.
Yeah, we wanted to keep it as real as the original version and, you know, explain to the celebrities that you are actually doing the race. You're not going to be, you know, we're not sneaking off to hotels at night. You are going to be running the race and making sure they understood that.
It's 30 days as opposed to 50 days. So the route's slightly shorter, the time's slightly shorter, but the experience is just as intense.
The pre-production is clearly this is a show which requires massive organisational skills.
Yeah, I mean, it's probably over a year in the making between the first initial coming, you know, putting a map out, where do we want to go, what's the adventure, what is the launch point, finding somewhere that's epic and on big scale and has lots of transport options, making sure you're covering, you know, areas that are well travelled, but also having something that's unknown and the viewers won't have seen before, and making sure you're exploring it in those ways, making sure you have checkpoints that are beaches or mountains or cities or unusual places, avoiding war zones, and then working out, you know, it's a thing that production and editorial have to work together so closely on this show because it's all entangled. Some places we might need 6 months to get visas, so we have to make sure we've cast and crewed up in time to make sure we have all of those, and understanding all the foibles of different countries we might go to.
And then the other thing that we always do in pre-production is we do a recce of the whole route. So this was something that Stephen Lambert and Tim put in place for the very first series before we sort of even knew that we could do it. We did a recce of the whole route to make sure that it was even possible. So 2 lucky assistant producers get to go travelling for 8 weeks, basically, where they do the whole thing for real. They have the same budget as the contestants would have, and we still do it for every series because every year it generates things that we hadn't sort of thought of before. When we did the Celebrity Series 1, which was through Europe, the recce really flagged, which we had sort of thought about, but not properly, that travelling without a card in Europe is almost impossible these days. Everywhere's contactless. So doing the recce with cash was really, really difficult. It was something we hadn't sort of anticipated for the recce. So those recces are still really important for us to kind of pick up on logistical issues, but also editorial. The Danes had made the show, and we talked to them, and they said that when they had made it, the reliance on having to talk to strangers and having to kind of interact with people at stations, because they couldn't have the use of cards, generated so much content that it was actually a sort of positive, and that ended up being sort of part of the series as well. So yeah, everything's editorial. Anytime there's an issue on the recce, you think this is going to be a nightmare, it always actually ends up being story.
The things that you think are going to be a problem, actually, like Lucy says, that's where the story often comes from.
We had, in series 1, our assistant producer who's doing it had to cross the Caspian Sea between Azerbaijan and Kazakhstan. And there's no passenger ferries, there's freight ferries that go kind of once every 28 days or something. And on the ferry, it broke down and he was stuck there for 3 days, and we asked him to do video diaries, and his video diaries came through and they were just gold, and we just knew this was going to be this. He was sort of going slightly stir crazy in this cabin with Kazakhstani truck drivers. And then the same thing happened on the shoot. The ferry broke down again when we were filming.
In terms of manpower, how many people have you got working at that pre-production stage?
It's probably only about 10 people, and 5 to 10 people in that very early route planning stage. You know, it's a core team of production and a core team of route producers and senior editorial working out what that route is.
And then we start casting.
Yeah.
You were saying, of course, this shows a celebration of human nature, and
yeah.
so the casting is absolutely everything.
It's a travel show, and I think people love, no doubt, they love seeing the locations and the beautiful GVs and the places we travel through. But at the heart of it, it's about the people taking part. It's a challenging casting job because the contributors have to sustain, it's 8 episodes. The civilian version is 8 episodes. I mean, one of the things that I don't think anyone realised when they watch it is quite how gruelling the process is to go through it. It's a physical challenge and also a mental challenge as well. So we have to make sure that the people who take part are really sort of physically and mentally robust. So that's a big part of the casting process. Everyone has to take part in what we call the escape challenge, which is where they start from the Studio Lambert offices. We give them a location in London, somewhere they won't have heard of, and they have to get there without their phones or their credit cards. And then you sort of see the dynamic between the pairs unfold much more naturally when they've got a sort of task to do.
Yeah, you want that relationship, you know, it's something that often people can relate to, whether it's siblings or parents or friends. It's, you know, something when you're watching as a viewer you relate to, and making sure you've got a broad range of people from all sorts of backgrounds, and that, you know, you get to know somebody, people make a judgment, and as we take them through the journey of the race, that you're learning something unusual or surprising about them that maybe on other TV shows you don't have time to do that.
And I think that's the thing with Race Across the World and lots of other Studio Lambert shows is the type of people you might not usually see on television.
I think last series we had 60,000,
100,000.
Last series we had 100,000 applicants.
100,000 pairs?
Yeah.
They always come as a pair. Yeah, they always come together as a pair, yeah.
We're very lucky at Studio Lambert. We've got a brilliant casting and welfare team that sit in-house, which is quite unusual. So it's just making sure, it's very important to us as the show as well, that we look after our contributors, and having somebody that's with them from the very start of the process through to the end. So during the casting period, during filming, after filming, while the edit's happening, and then throughout the whole of transmission and beyond. You know, we're still in contact with all of our contributors. They often go on to do different things, and we're in touch. It becomes a bigger and bigger family as we go.
A more practical necessity of race life was being followed by the film crew every step of the way. And for the first time, we reveal the arduous endeavour of life behind the scenes.
So, what do you think I'm going to ask you?
How do you feel today about the changes in the weather?
I thought at the time, at the start of the race, that we just do and we just race and the camera people run round us and film what we do. But the teams of people and the background stuff that makes television is huge.
Goodbye. See you somewhere.
Whenever. We had a camera person, we had a sound person.
Medic.
Yeah, we had a medic.
Second camera. Follow vehicle.
I did feel for our crew on a number of occasions, like we would suddenly book tickets for a 30-hour ride, and they'd somehow have to get the logistics of getting the follow vehicle to the destination where we were going on
the bus themselves.
Yes, exactly. Half the crew had to come with us on the train. The other half were dashing in a car in their vehicle to get ahead of us coming off of the train. You know, we just like decided on the spur of a moment that we would buy these tickets, and all hell would break loose.
So I'd like to take us into the shoot. So perhaps you could tell us about the different teams. It's obviously very well organised.
Yeah. So there's about 65 people probably in total, 65 to 70 people across the team, made up of sort of 4 parts. So you've got the embedded teams, obviously, that are racing with the contributors, who are an incredible set of humans who, you know, whatever the contributors are doing, they are doing. If they're on an overnight bus, so are they. So that's a producer who shoots on a Sony FX3, so it's like a small handheld camera, so they're very nimble, with an assistant producer who are, you know, logging everything that's going on, monitoring the sound, telling us about all the stories that are being logged to us. And then a medic who's travelling with that team. And then we have a researcher who are wrangling all of the rushes, shooting some GVs. So if they're jumping on a train, they're filming that train leaving, and following behind them in a support vehicle. And then you've got the checkpoint team who are on location, sort of location HQ, where you have senior production and editorial, who are looking after, you know, running the actual race, looking after all of the welfare of the contributors and the crew. And then you've got the series director with a camera up and sound who are filming all those run routes when they're coming into checkpoints, those, you know, epic drone shots. But obviously they're having to plan. We don't know, are they going to arrive at 3 in the morning? Are they arriving at lunchtime? Is it a daylight arrival, a nighttime arrival? Are they coming on a boat?
So when you say run
train?
routes, is that what you're talking about?
Yes. So when they get to their first location and they get their Garmin message, they need to proceed to hit certain points and then come into the checkpoint.
So it all becomes a little more intimate and it changes gear slightly.
Yes. Yeah. So they don't know, whether that's going to be day or night. And then you've got a production team working out, you know, how everyone's laundry is going to be done in 2 days and turned around and back out on the road again.
There are hotels where they stay, so they obviously have to be carefully canvassed to make sure they can cope.
And, you know, we all think we're arriving on this day and we've got this many rooms. Well, actually, you know, the teams are taking longer than we thought, or they're quicker than we thought, and suddenly we're scrambling to find other hotels, or, you know, can we have extra rooms? So that's sort of the checkpoint team on location that are running it. Then you have sort of mission control as well in London and HQ, which is about 15 people. So that's production and editorial again. And then there's a story team who are logging, working with the story AP, with the AP on the teams. So they're communicating all that story, making sure we're getting the information. It's like live TV without cameras.
It's because it's 24 hours around the clock. There's never a moment where someone isn't... Yes, you might have 3 teams who are bedded down in a hotel, but another team will be crossing a border or on an overnight bus or an overnight train. So there needs to be 24-hour coverage, which is one of the reasons we have the London team and the location team operating at all hours of the day and night.
Working with fixers and working out the different jobs that contestants can choose to do to supplement their income have to be sorted. How does that work?
So obviously there's a list of things they could do. We don't know what they're going to do. Like we had on series 4, the duck herding. So we had Stephen and Viv, you know, we knew they had to be there. They had to be there at 5 a.m. for the ducks, but their train was delayed. So it was one of those classic overheard in TV conversations where we were having a conversation, there was 10,000 big ducks being released, and could the ducks not be released, and could they possibly stay in their hutches? But they couldn't because the eggs would spoil, but we knew we still had 10,000 small ducks, so it was fine, and everybody could get there. And then, you know, the GV team then following behind and shooting all these epic shots of 10,000 ducks running across a field.
So I wanted to come back just briefly to the team, the embed team, to talk a little bit more about health and safety.
Yeah, I mean, so on the recce, we send a medic, a remote trauma person goes on that recce, so they've done the route, that feeds into all of our protocols. You know, we've been into lots of hostile environments or dangerous countries, and just making sure, you know, we know everything's been dynamically risk assessed because things can change on a dime, whether it's weather, political unrest, you know, it's being aware of all of that and making sure they're there to monitor what the crew are doing, what the cast are doing, and making sure everybody's safe.
So the duty of care obviously to the crew as well.
Yes.
So presumably if they had some major issues, you could do a swap out, or can't do the same with the contestants though. I know I've watched it a couple of times when they're not feeling very well, and I've been thinking, oh no, what do we do now? What does happen when they don't feel very well?
Well, it's part of the story, and that's the great thing about race. When things happen, it becomes part of the programme and it's part of the story.
Yeah, and over 8 weeks, which is such a long time, it's such a luxury really to be able to film over such a long time, those things are going to happen, and just the very nature of filming across often multiple different countries means that it is really unpredictable, and we're operating in the real world. We're not within a kind of, you know, set or a made-up world. We're in the real world, and anything might happen. We actually often say we prefer it when things go wrong while we're filming, because then it can become part of the story. The frustrating thing is if it goes wrong sort of 3 days before we're about to start filming, which is on series 2. Our route was meant to be New York to the bottom of Argentina, the southernmost tip of Argentina, Ushuaia. And about 3 or 4 weeks before we were due to start filming, we found out we weren't going to get our US visas in time. So we had to pivot and set up a whole new launch in Mexico City with sort of 3 weeks to go. But it ended up being a brilliant launch, and sort of loved doing it there. And then also on series 2, we had issues with plenty of the countries we were travelling through had states of emergency while we were either approaching or actually travelling through them.
With violent protests against government cutbacks escalating on the streets of Ecuador, a state of emergency is in place, with borders to the country closed. The only other land route from Colombia into Peru is through thick Amazonian jungle. But the presence of armed guerrilla groups means travelling through this area is prohibited.
For your safety, it is now necessary for you to fly to Peru in order to continue towards the finish line.
Oh my God, we're flying.
It's actually quite a shame. We've done that whole journey to miss out quite a big chunk. That's actually quite sad. It must be pretty serious if we have to resort to these measures.
I mean, this is kind of classic race. The thing that we think was going to be the problem ended up, wasn't that at all. We thought crossing the Darien Gap, which was, we'd planned for months and months and months and talked to, we'd checked out boats and spoken to loads of safety people and locals and planned all of that. That was the bit we were worried about. While this was happening, our advance team had gone ahead to Quito in Ecuador, which was the checkpoint, and then a state of emergency was declared, as you saw. So we then had, all of our teams were on the Darien Gap crossing via boat. So we had to extract our exec producer who was stuck in Quito during the state of emergency with tyres being flown out of the window, get him back on a plane out of Ecuador. And then we had to find a checkpoint in 12 hours, stand up a checkpoint, find a hotel, get the fixers to find a place. Was there a route there? Ended up being in the middle of a desert, and could we feed everybody there? Was there communication? And so that we could tell all the contributors when they came off the boat, the checkpoint had changed and where they had to go to make sure that the show could keep running.
I think this particular hotel we chose had no Wi-Fi, which
I don't think the location team were not the best
editorially, it was
us.
an amazing. It was this tented in the middle of the desert in Colombia. So editorially, it was beautiful. It was quite a challenge for production, and sometimes between checkpoints for the checkpoint team is quite difficult travel. So if we've got a team going too fast, there's always the risk that they're going to get there before the checkpoint team have been able to get there. It hasn't happened yet, but we sort of live in constant fear of that happening.
This kind of leads naturally into what we wanted to talk about next, which is a bit more about the story and how you actually can you plan it, how you plan it.
The thing about race is it's sort of telling two stories all the time. There's the story of the race and the countries that we're travelling through, and then there's the individual stories of our contributors. And the race story is really unpredictable. We don't know what's going to happen with that. We can't predict when people are going to miss buses, when a train's going to break down, when a freak storm's going to disrupt travel, when someone's going to lose their passport or their money belt. But those are the things that make it exciting. Those are the things that make it feel like the format is just very, very lightly worn and that anything can happen. We have the checkpoints that they have to hit. There are a few rules, they're not allowed to use the internet, they're not allowed their cards, but really, other than that, it kind of ends up feeling a bit more like a documentary because the format is worn so lightly. What we can sort of control a little bit more is the telling of the personal stories. So we've cast our contributors because we know we've got these rich, interesting stories to tell, and we can think about, we don't want to tell all their stories in episode 1. We don't want to lean into their backstories right at the top. We want to tell them slowly over 8 episodes. So we can plan a little bit for when those stories are going to come out. So Alfie in series 4, who lost his mother when he was very young, we knew he was going to be going to Hoi An, and in Hoi An, they send these lanterns down. You can go out on boat trips and send these lanterns down the river. So sort of knew that might be, if he was comfortable doing it there, a really lovely place to tell the story about his mum. And then with Betty and James, they, her story was that she suffered from this condition called MRKH, which is she was born without a womb. And she was just only comfortable talking about that with her brother in leg 7, so episode 7, which is right at the end of the series. So it feels sort of quite different that we would be landing this huge story about her, which is this huge thing to know about her right at the end of the series, but that was when she was able to talk about it with her brother, so that was the honest and right time to tell it.
Like, honestly, I forget that, you know, that you can't have children, like...
Like, I mean, me and you have never had a conversation even about it, have
No.
we? It's definitely made me, I think, develop a lot of, like, the negative attributes I have, like overthinking, like wanting to feel like in control, because I don't know, I just felt like at 16, like something was taken away from me that I couldn't control.
Yeah.
When you've been saying everything happens for a reason, like I can't believe that, because...
Yeah, that makes more sense now. I get that, you know, my obviously philosophy is everything happens for a reason, but
yeah,
to you, obviously not. And that being positive is not always the best way to deal with things.
Come here. Thank you.
To hear that was tough, and this is the first time, you know, we've talked about it and I've heard it from Betty herself, and it's only up until now that I realised that, you know, how much it does actually affect her. Excuse me, that's a frog in my throat.
For 9 years, like, I've been so fixated on what my body, like, can't do.
Rather than what it can do.
Yeah. It can carry this 20 kg bag, like, around the world.
Whoa, whoa, it's only 16. Chill out. Brave is now probably an understatement. I was thinking of a new word for it, but yeah. I think... Can someone just come hug me, please? Come here.
Yeah.
That's quite a moment, isn't it? Can you tell me a little bit about the care that's taken there and how it works?
Yeah, I mean, I think the embedded teams obviously get extremely close with their contributors. They're living, breathing, eating, you know, with each other. And I think it's about having that respect with their contributors and having a conversation, and, you know, Betty wanting to own her story, and we want somebody to tell their story in their way. And then throughout the process, like Betty with her story, during the edit, we would then have a conversation with her about how we were telling her story and did she feel comfortable, and, you know, making sure. And then when it came out on air, you know, she became a great advocate for it, and it was a really empowering, positive story for her that we've supported her through. And, you know, we want it to be a good experience. We want to tell someone's story in a strong, powerful way.
And presumably it must have happened that somebody says at the beginning that they're happy to talk about it, but when it comes to it, they can't? How does that work?
It actually doesn't, because we talk about it so much during the casting process, and we have, you know, many meetings with them. We visit them at home. They meet with different members of the team. They've all seen the show. They understand that we handle these topics really sensitively. There might be moments where they, for example, with the Alfie Hoyan scene, if he'd said, I'm not comfortable talking about this today, then absolutely we would have left it and brought it up at another time. So it might be that on a day they say, I'm not feeling it today, we've missed a bus, I don't want to talk about this today. But that later on, they will always find a moment that feels right for them to talk about it.
So can we move on to the nitty-gritty of getting it all into the edit and out the other side?
Yes, I mean, obviously on Race, we don't know when things are going to happen. You don't know when those big stories are going to happen, when they're going to miss a bus. So there was a lot of rolling on stuff. So I think our ratio is about 170 hours for every hour of TV, which is obviously an inordinate amount. But the researchers are wrangling that, and then those drives are brought back with brushes runners to London and ingested into the edit. The whole edit process is sort of probably about 6 months from the start of, we start the first episode during the shoot until it goes on to air, with each episode taking anywhere from 16 to 20 odd weeks. Probably maybe 15 to 20 suites running at any one point at its sort of biggest. And it's, you know, each episode is crafted and then goes to a finish editor for those beautiful GV moments, you know, those tiny little moments that I think you have in Race often that reflect the story.
We're lucky in a way because the sort of way the shoot's set out is that it's leg by leg. You've just got that content to work with for that episode, so you're not kind of, if a story happened in leg one, then it will be in episode one. You can't kind of move the stories around in that regard. But I guess the skill is kind of building these characters up over 8 episodes, and there's going to be ups and downs, and showing all of that and interweaving it with the race. The story of the race is what takes kind of the most time, and what's the real skill is getting that balance. And even when you're having race moments, which feel exciting and adrenalized, we always need to be learning something about the characters through them. And I think that's what race does, is it kind of unpacks slowly, and you start to understand people more, and then you really start to fall in love with them because of that, because once you understand the way someone operates, you can, you know, get to know them.
Also, I've got a note here about Stephen and Viv dancing to Ed Sheeran.
Oh, yes.
And I just thought that would be fun.
Well, that was another moment that we just couldn't plan for. Stephen and Viv in the last episode ended up, I think they sort of knew that they probably weren't going to make it in first place, and they took a moment and in a petrol station in Java, in Indonesia, and danced to Ed Sheeran. And it was kind of one of those moments where you can kind of plan for these beautiful travelogue moments in these incredible locations, and actually sometimes the most powerful moments happen in a petrol station in Indonesia.
And it was such a success that they added like a catch-up reunion show, because it was that thing for the audience to see how the journey had affected people and bringing people back together and looking at how the race was. So yeah, that was added from series 2 onwards.
Often we cast people who are at some sort of crossroads, wanting to do something new but not quite sure what that is. And then the reunion episode is a chance for us to see have they followed through on that, and you know, very, very often they have, which is really lovely to see.
But it's one of those shows that doesn't really change, because it's new every time.
Yeah. No, we haven't actually made really any significant changes to the format of the show itself, just because filming in brand new locations every year makes it feel fresh. We always say that every time we film it, feels like a first series all over again, because we're filming in a brand new part of the world, brand new challenges, brand new excitements, and also the contributors. There's unlimited stories to tell. We're casting at the moment, and we've sort of had this wish list of people that we're looking for, and all these people have come through that are nothing like the people on our wish list, but are completely new in different ways. And it just makes you think it could, you know, it's sort of unlimited, really, the stories we could keep on telling. And we've got other ideas, which I'm probably not allowed to say about how we can go back to places we've already been, but do them in a kind of different way.
It's been a delight hearing more about it, and I hope that you've enjoyed it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kezia. And thank you, Lucy.
Thank you.